Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Western Canon Challenge, where we are reading the entirety of the Western literary canon out loud. Today we are beginning Book 2 of The Will to Power, and this is entitled Criticism of the Highest Values That Have Prevailed Hitherto, and Section 1 is entitled Criticism of Religion. I will read the little header for that. And then underneath that, we continue with the aphorisms. We are up to aphorism number 135. And above 135 is point number 1, or section 1, whatever you want to call it. And it is entitled Concerning the Origin of Religions. But I'll make that clear when we get to it. 1. Criticism of Religion. All the beauty and sublimity with which we have invested real and imagined things I will show to be the property and product of man, and this should be the most beautiful apology. Man as a poet, as a thinker, as a god, as love, as power. Oh, the regal liberality with which he has lavished gifts upon things in order to impoverish himself and make himself feel wretched. Hitherto this has been his greatest disinterestedness, that he admired and worshipped, and knew how to conceal from himself that he it was who had created what he admired. 1. Concerning the Origin of Religions. Aphorism 135. The Origin of Religion. Just as the illiterate man of today believes that his wrath is the cause of his being angry, that his mind is the cause of his thinking, that his soul is the cause of his feeling, in short, just as a mass of psychological entities are still unthinkingly postulated as causes, so in a still more primitive age the same phenomena were interpreted by man by means of personal entities. Those conditions of his soul which seemed strange, overwhelming, and rapturous he regarded as obsessions and bewitching influences emanating from the power of some personality. Thus the Christian, the most puerile and backward man of this age, traces hope, peace, and the feeling of deliverance to a psychological inspiration on the part of God. Being by nature a sufferer and a creature in need of repose, states of happiness, peace, and resignation perforce seem strange to him, and seem to need some explanation. Among intelligent, strong, and vigorous races, the epileptic is mostly the cause of a belief in the existence of some foreign power. But all such examples of apparent subjection, as for instance the bearing of the exalted man, of the poet, of the great criminal, or the passions, love and revenge, lead to the invention of supernatural powers. A condition is made concrete by being identified with a personality, and when this condition overtakes anybody, it is ascribed to that personality. In other words, in the psychological concept of God, a certain state of the soul is personified as a cause in order to appear as an effect. The psychological logic is as follows. When the feeling of power suddenly seizes and overwhelms a man, and this takes place in the case of all the great passions, a doubt arises in him concerning his own person. He dares not think himself the cause of this astonishing sensation, and thus he posits a stronger person, a Godhead, as its cause. In short, the origin of religion lies in the extreme feelings of power, which, being strange, take men by surprise, and just as the sick man, who feels one of his limbs unaccountably heavy, concludes that another man must be sitting on it, so the ingenious homo religiosus divides himself up into several people. Religion is an example of the alteration de la personalité, a sort of fear and sensation of terror in one's own presence, but also a feeling of inordinate rapture and exaltation. Among sick people, the sensation of health suffices to awaken a belief in the proximity of God. 136. Rudimentary psychology of the religious man. All changes are effects. All effects are effects of will. The notion of nature and of natural law is lacking. All effects presuppose an agent. Rudimentary psychology. One is only a cause oneself, when one knows that one has willed something. Result: states of power impute to man the feeling that he is not the cause of them, that he is not responsible for them. They come without being willed to do so. Consequently, we cannot be their originators. Will that is not free, that is to say, the knowledge of a change in our condition which we have not helped to bring about, requires a strong will. Consequence of this rudimentary psychology: man has never dared to credit himself with his strong and startling moods. He has always conceived them as passive, as imposed upon him from outside. Religion is the offshoot of a doubt concerning the entity of the person, an alteration of the personality. Insofar as everything great and strong in man was considered superhuman and foreign, man belittled himself. He laid the two sides, the very pitiable and weak side and the very strong and startling side, apart in two spheres, and called the one man and the other God. And he has continued to act on these lines. During the period of the moral idiosyncrasy, he did not interpret his lofty and sublime moral states as proceeding from his own will, or as the work of the person. Even the Christian himself divides his personality into two parts, the one a mean and weak fiction, which he calls man, and the other which he calls God, deliverer and Savior. Religion has lowered the concept man. Its ultimate conclusion is that all goodness, greatness, and truth are superhuman, and are only obtainable by the grace of God. 137. One way of raising man out of his self-abasement, which brought about the decline of the point of view that classed all lofty and strong states of the soul as strange, was the theory of relationship. These lofty and strong states of the soul could at least be interpreted as the influence of our forebears. We belonged to each other. We were irrevocably joined. We grew in our own esteem by acting according to the example of a model known to us all. There is an attempt on the part of noble families to associate religion with their own feelings of self-respect. Poets and seers do the same thing. They feel proud that they have been worthy, that they have been selected for such association. They esteem it an honor, not to be considered at all as individuals, but as mere mouthpieces. Homer. Man gradually takes possession of the highest and proudest states of his soul, as also of his acts and his works. Formerly it was believed that one paid oneself the greatest honor by denying one's own responsibility for the highest deeds one accomplished, and by ascribing them to God. The will which was not free appeared to be that which imparted a higher value to a deed. In those days a God was postulated as the author of the deed. 138. Priests are the actors of something which is supernatural, either in the way of ideals, gods, or saviors, and they have to make people believe in them. In this they find their calling. This is the purpose of their instincts. In order to make it as credible as possible, they have to exert themselves to the utmost extent in the art of posing. Their actors' sagacity must, above all, aim at giving them a clean conscience, by means of which alone it is possible to persuade effectively. 139. The priest wishes to make it an understood thing, that he is the highest type of man, that he rules, even over those who wield the power, that he is indispensable and unassailable, that he is the strongest power in the community, not by any means to be replaced or undervalued. Means thereto. He alone is cultured. He alone is the man of virtue. He alone has sovereign power over himself. He alone is, in a certain sense, God, and ultimately goes back to the Godhead. He alone is the middleman between God and others. The Godhead administers punishment to everyone who puts the priest at a disadvantage or thinks in opposition to him. Means thereto. Truth exists. There is only one way of attaining to it, and that is to become a priest. Everything good which relates either to order, nature, or tradition is to be traced to the wisdom of the priests. The Holy Book is their work. The whole of nature is only a fulfillment of the maxims which it contains. No other source of goodness exists than the priests. Every other kind of perfection, even the warrior's, is different in rank from that of the priests. Consequence: if the priest is to be the highest type, then the degrees which lead to his virtues must be the degrees of value among men. Study, emancipation from material things, inactivity, impassibility, absence of passion, solemnity. The opposite of all this is found in the lowest type of man. The priest has taught a kind of morality which conduces to his being considered the highest type of man. He conceives a type which is the reverse of his own, the Chandala. By making these as contemptible as possible, some strength is lent to the order of castes. The priest's excessive fear of sensuality also implies that the latter is the most serious threat to the order of castes, that is to say, order in general. Every quote-unquote free tendency in puncto puncti overthrows the laws of marriage. 140. The philosopher considered as the development of the priestly type. He has the heritage of the priest in his blood, even as a rival. He is compelled to fight with the same weapons as the priest of his time. He aspires to the highest authority. What is it that bestows authority upon men who have no physical power to wield, no army, no arms at all? How do such men gain authority over those who are in possession of material power and who represent authority? Philosophers enter the lists against princes, victorious conquerors, and wise statesmen. They can do it only by establishing the belief that they are in possession of a power which is higher and stronger, God. Nothing is strong enough. Everyone is in need of the meditation and the services of priests. They establish themselves as indispensable intercessors. The conditions of their existence are, 1. That people believe in the absolute superiority of their God, in fact, believe in their God. 2. That there is no other access, no direct access to God, save through them. The second condition alone gives rise to the concept heterodoxy. The first to the concept disbelievers, that is to say, he who believes in another God. 141. A criticism of the holy lie. That a lie is allowed in pursuit of holy ends is a principle which belongs to the theory of all priestcraft, and the object of this inquiry is to discover to what extent it belongs to its practice. But philosophers, too, whenever they intend taking over the leadership of mankind with the ulterior motives of priests in their minds, have never failed to arrogate to themselves the right to lie. Plato above all. But the most elaborate of lies is the double lie, developed by the typically Aryan philosophers of the Vedanta. Two systems contradicting each other in all their main points, but interchangeable, complementary, and mutually exploratory when educational ends were in question. The lie of the one has to create a condition in which the truth of the other can alone become intelligible. How far does the holy lie of priests and philosophers go? The question here is, what hypotheses do they advance in regard to education, and what are the dogmas they are compelled to invent in order to do justice to these hypotheses? First, they must have power, authority, and absolute credibility on their side. Secondly, they must have the direction of the whole of nature, so that everything affecting the individual seems to be determined by their law. Thirdly, their domain of power must be very extensive, in order that its control may escape the notice of those they subject. They must know the penal code of the life beyond, of the life after death, and of course the means whereby the road to blessedness may be discovered. They have put the notion of a natural course of things out of sight. But as they are intelligent and thoughtful people, they are able to promise a host of effects, which they naturally say are conditioned by prayer or by the strict observance of their law. They can, moreover, prescribe a large number of things which are exceedingly reasonable, only they must not point to experience or empiricism as the source of this wisdom, but to revelation or to the fruits of the most severe exercises of penance. The holy lie, therefore, applies principally to the purpose of an action. The natural purpose, reason, is made to vanish. A moral purpose, the observance of some law, a service to God, seems to be the purpose. To the consequence of an action, the natural consequence is interpreted as something supernatural, and in order to be on surer ground, other uncontrollable and supernatural consequences are foretold. In this way, the concepts good and evil are created, and seem quite divorced from the natural concepts useful, harmful, life-promoting, life-retarding. Indeed, inasmuch as another life is imagined, the former concepts may even be antagonistic to nature's concept of good and evil. In this way, the proverbial concept conscience is created, an inner voice, which, though it makes itself heard in regard to every action, does not measure the worth of that action according to its results, but according to its conformity or nonconformity to the quote-unquote law. The holy lie therefore invented 1. A God, who punishes and rewards, who recognizes and carefully observes the law book of the priests, and who is particular about sending them into the world as his mouthpieces and plenipotentiaries. 2. An afterlife, in which alone the great penal machine is supposed to be active. To this end the immortality of the soul was invented. 3. A conscience in man, understood as the knowledge that good and evil are permanent values, that God himself speaks through it, whenever its counsels are in conformity with the priestly precepts. 4. Morality as the denial of all natural processes, as the subjection of all phenomena to a moral order, as the interpretation of all phenomena as the effects of a moral order of things, that is to say, the concept of punishment and reward, as the only power and only creator of all transformations. 5. Truths given, revealed and identical with the teaching of the priests, as the condition to all salvation and happiness in this and the next world. In short, what is the price paid for the improvement supposed to be due to morality? The unhinging of reason, the reduction of all motives to fear and hope, punishment and reward, dependence upon the tutelage of priests, and upon a formulary exactitude which is supposed to express a divine will. The implantation of conscience, which establishes a false science in the place of experience and experiment, as though all one had to do or had not to do were predetermined, a kind of contraction of the seeking and striving spirit. In short, the worst mutilation of man that can be imagined, and it is pretended that the good man is the result. Practically speaking, all reason, the whole heritage of intelligence, subtlety, and caution, the first condition of the priestly canon, is arbitrarily reduced, when it is too late, to a simple mechanical process. Conformity with the law becomes a purpose in itself. It is the highest purpose. Life no longer contains any problems. The whole conception of the world is polluted by the notion of punishment. Life itself, owing to the fact that the priest's life is upheld as the non plus ultra of perfection, is transformed into a denial and pollution of life. The concept God represents an aversion to life, and even a criticism and a condemning of it. Truth is transformed in the mind into priestly prevarication, the striving after truth, into the study of the Scriptures, into the way to become a theologian. 142. A criticism of the law book of Manu. The whole book is founded upon the holy lie. Was it the well-being of humanity that inspired the whole of this system? Was this kind of man who believes in the interested nature of every action interested or not interested in the success of this system? The desire to improve mankind. Whence comes the inspiration to this feeling? Whence is the concept improvement taken? We find a class of men, the sacerdotal class, who consider themselves the standard pattern, the highest example and most perfect expression of the type man. The notion of quote-unquote improving mankind to this class of men means to make mankind like themselves. They believe in their own superiority. They will be superior in practice. The cause of the holy lie is the will to power. Establishment of the dominion. To this end, ideas which place a non plus ultra of power with the priesthood are made to prevail. Power acquired by lying was the result of the recognition of the fact that it was not already possessed physically in a military form. Lying as a supplement to power. This is a new concept of truth. It is a mistake to presuppose unconscious and innocent development in this quarter, a sort of self-deception. Fanatics are not the discoverers of such exhaustive systems of oppression. Cold-blooded reflection must have been at work here, the same sort of reflection which Plato showed when he worked out his state. One must desire the means when one desires the end. Concerning this political maxim, all legislators have always been quite clear. We possess the classical model, and it is specifically Aryan. We can therefore hold the most gifted and most reflective type of man responsible for the most systematic lie that has ever been told. Everywhere almost the lie was copied, and thus avian influence corrupted the world. 143. Much is said today about the Semitic spirit of the New Testament, but the thing referred to is merely priestcraft. And in the purest example of an Aryan law book, in Manu, this kind of, quote, Semitic spirit, end quote, that is to say, sacerdotalism, is worse than anywhere else. The development of the Jewish hierarchy is not original. They learnt the scheme in Babylon. It is Aryan. When, later on, the same thing became dominant in Europe, under the preponderance of Germanic blood, this was in conformity to the spirit of the ruling race, a striking case of atavism. The German Middle Ages aimed at a revival of the Aryan order of castes. Mohammedanism, in its turn, learned from Christianity the use of a beyond as an instrument of punishment. The scheme of a permanent community, with priests at its head, this oldest product of Asia's great culture in the domain of organization, naturally provoked reflection and imitation in every way. Plato is an example of this, but above all, the Egyptians. 144. Moralities and religions are the principal means by which one can modify men into whatever one, provided one is possessed of an overflow of creative power, and can cause one's will to prevail over long periods of time. 145. If one wished to see an affirmative Aryan religion, which is the product of a ruling class, one should read the law book of Manu, the deification of that feeling of power in the Brahmin. It is interesting to note that it originated in the warrior caste, and was later transferred to the priests. If one wished to see an affirmative religion of the Semitic order, which is the product of the ruling class, one should read the Quran, or the earlier portions of the Old Testament. Mohammedanism, as a religion for men, has profound contempt for the sentimentality and prevarication of Christianity, which, according to the Mohammedans, is a woman's religion. If one wished to see a negative religion of the Semitic order, which is the product of the oppressed class, one should read the New Testament, which, according to the Indian and Aryan points of view, is a religion for the Chandala. If one wished to see a negative Aryan religion, which is the product of the ruling classes, one should study Buddhism. It is quite in the nature of things that we have no Aryan religion, which is the product of the oppressed classes, for that would have been a contradiction. A race of masters is either paramount or else it goes to the dogs. 146. Religion, per se, has nothing to do with morality. Yet both offshoots of the Jewish religion are essentially moral religions, which prescribe the rules of living and procure obedience to their principles by means of rewards and punishment. 147. Paganism, Christianity. Paganism is that which says yea to all that is natural. It is innocence in being natural, naturalness. Christianity is that which says no to all that is natural. It is a certain lack of dignity in being natural, hostility to nature. Quote-unquote innocent. Petronius is innocent, for instance. Beside this happy man, a Christian is absolutely devoid of innocence. But since even the Christian status is ultimately only a natural condition, the term Christian soon begins to mean the counterfeiting of the psychological interpretation. 148. The Christian priest is from the root a mortal enemy of sensuality. One cannot imagine a great contrast to his attitude than the guileless, slightly awed and solemn attitude which the religious rites of the most honorable women in Athens maintained in the presence of the symbol of sex. In all non-ascetic religions, the procreative act is the sect per se, a sort of symbol of perfection and of the designs of the future, rebirth, immortality. 149. Our belief in ourselves is the greatest fetter, the most telling spur, and the strongest pinion. Christianity ought to have elevated the innocence of man to the position of an article of belief. Men would then have become gods. In those days, believing was still possible. 150. The egregious lie of history, as if it were the corruption of paganism that opened the road to Christianity. As a matter of fact, it was the enfeeblement and moralization of the man of antiquity. The new interpretation of natural functions, which made them appear like vices, had already gone before. 151. Religions are ultimately wrecked by the belief in morality. The idea of the Christian moral God becomes untenable, hence atheism, as though there could be no other God. Culture is likewise wrecked by the belief in morality. For when the necessary and only possible conditions of its growth are revealed, nobody will any longer countenance it. Buddhism. 152. The physiology of nihilistic religions. All in all, the nihilistic religions are systematized histories of sickness, described in religious and moral terminology. In pagan cultures, it is around the interpretation of the great annual cycles that the religious cult turns. In Christianity, it is around a cycle of paralytic phenomena. 153. This nihilistic religion gathers together all the decadent elements and things of like order which it can find in antiquity, vis-a-vis a. the weak and the botched, the refuse of the ancient world and that of which it rid itself with most violence, b. those who are morally obsessed with anti-pagan, c. those who are weary of politics and indifferent, the blasé Romans, the denationalized who know not what they are, d. those who are tired of themselves, who are happy to be party to a subterranean conspiracy. 154. Buddha versus Christ. Among the nihilistic religions, Christianity and Buddhism may always be sharply distinguished. Buddhism is the expression of a fine evening, perfectly sweet and mild. It is a sort of gratitude towards all that lies hidden, including that which it entirely lacks, vis-a-vis bitterness, disillusionment, and resentment. Finally, it possesses lofty intellectual love. It has got over all the subtlety of philosophical contradictions, and is even resting after it, though it is precisely from that source that it derives its intellectual glory and its glow as of a sunset. It originated in the higher classes. Christianity is a degenerative movement, consisting of all kinds of decaying and excremental elements. It is not the expression of the downfall of a race. It is, from the root, an agglomeration of all the morbid elements which are mutually attractive and which gravitate to one another. It is therefore not a national religion, not determined by race. It appeals to the disinherited everywhere. It consists of a foundation of resentment against all that is successful and dominant. It is in need of a symbol which represents the damnation of everything successful and dominant. It is opposed to every form of intellectual movement, to all philosophy. It takes up the cudgels for idiots and utters a curse upon all intellect. Resentment against those who are gifted, learned, intellectually independent. In all these it suspects the element of success and domination. 155. In Buddhism, this thought prevails. All passions, everything which creates emotions and leads to blood, is a call to action. To this extent alone are its believers warned against evil, for action has no sense, it merely binds one to existence. All existence, however, has no sense. Evil is interpreted as that which leads to irrationalism, to the affirmation of means whose end is denied. A road to non-entity is the desideratum, hence all emotional impulses are regarded with horror. For instance, on no account seek after revenge, be the enemy of no one. The hedonism of the weary finds its highest expression here. Nothing is more utterly foreign to Buddhism than the Jewish fanaticism of St. Paul. Nothing could be more contrary to its instinct than the tension, fire, and unrest of the religious man, and above all, that form of sensuality which sanctifies Christianity with the name love. Moreover, it is the cultured and very intellectual classes who find blessedness in Buddhism, a race wearied and besotted by centuries of philosophical quarrels, but not beneath all culture as those classes were from which Christianity sprang. In the Buddhistic ideal, there is essentially an emancipation from good and evil. A very subtle suggestion of a beyond to all morality is thought out in its teaching. And this beyond is supposed to be compatible with perfection, the condition being that even good actions are only needed pro tem, merely as a means, that is to say, in order to be free from all action. 156. How very curious it is to see a nihilistic religion such as Christianity sprung from and in keeping with a decrepit and worn-out people who have outlived all strong instincts, being transferred step by step to another environment, that is to say, to a land of young people who have not yet lived at all. The joy of the final chapters, of the fold and of the evening preached to barbarians and Germans. How thoroughly all of it must first have been barbarized, Germanized. To those who had dreamed of a Valhalla, who found happiness only in war, a supranational religion preached in the midst of chaos, where no nations yet existed even. 157. The only way to refute priests and religions is this, to show that their errors are no longer beneficent, that they are rather harmful. In short, that their own quote-unquote proof of power no longer holds good. 2. Concerning the history of Christianity. 158. Christianity as a historical reality should not be confounded with that one root which its name recalls. The other roots from which it has sprung are by far the more important. It is an unprecedented abuse of names to identify such manifestations of decay and such abortions as the Christian Church, Christian belief, and Christian life with that holy name. What did Christ deny? Everything which today is called Christian. 159. The whole of the Christian creed, all Christian quote-unquote truth, is idle falsehood and deception, and is precisely the reverse of that which was at bottom of the first Christian movement. All that which is in the ecclesiastical sense is Christian, is just exactly what is most radically anti-Christian. Crowds of things and people appear instead of symbols. History takes the place of eternal facts. It is all forms, rites, and dogmas instead of a practice of life. To be really Christian would mean to be absolutely indifferent to dogmas, cults, priests, church, and theology. The practice of Christianity is no more an impossible fantasy than the practice of Buddhism is. It is merely a means of happiness. 160. Jesus goes straight to the point, the kingdom of heaven in the heart, and he does not find the means in duty to the Jewish church. He even regards the reality of Judaism, its need to maintain itself, as nothing. He is concerned purely with the inner man. Neither does he make anything of all the coarse forms relating to man's intercourse with God. He is opposed to the whole of the teachings of repentance and atonement. He points out how man ought to live in order to feel himself deified, and how futile it is on his part to hope to live properly by showing repentance and contrition for his sins. Sin is of no account, is practically his chief standpoint. Sin, repentance, forgiveness. All this does not belong to Christianity. It is Judaism or paganism, which has become mixed up with Christ's teaching. 161. The kingdom of heaven is a state of the heart. Of children it is written, "For theirs is the kingdom of heaven." It has nothing to do with superterrestrial things. The kingdom of God cometh, not chronologically or historically, not on a certain day in the calendar. It is not something which one day appears and was not previously there. It is a change of feeling in the individual. It is something which may come at any time and which may be absent at any time. 162. The thief on the cross. When the criminal himself, who endures a painful death, declares, "The way this Jesus suffers and dies, without a murmur of revolt or enmity, graciously and resignedly, is the only way," he assents to the gospel, and by this very fact he is in paradise. 163. Jesus bids us not to resist, either by deeds or in our heart, him who ill treats us. He bids us admit of no grounds for separating ourselves from our wives. He bids us make no distinction between foreigners and fellow countrymen, strangers and familiars. He bids us show anger to no one, and treat no one with contempt. He gives alms secretly, not to desire to become rich, not to swear, not to stand in judgment, become reconciled with our enemies and forgive offenses, not to worship in public. Quote-unquote blessedness is nothing promised. It is here with us if we only wish to live and act in a particular way. 164. Subsequent editions. The whole of the prophet and thaumaturgist attitudes in the bad temper, while the conjuring up of a supreme tribunal of justice is an abominable corruption. See Mark 6:11, quote, "And whosoever shall not receive you, verily I say to you, it shall be more tolerable for Sodom and Gomorrah," end quote, etc. The quote-unquote fig tree, Matthew 21:18 and 19. Quote, "Now in the morning as he returned into the city, he hungered. And when he saw a fig tree in the way, he came to it, and found nothing thereon, but leaves only, and said unto it, Let no fruit grow on thee henceforward forever. And presently the fig tree withered away." End quote. 165. The teaching of rewards and punishments has become mixed up with Christianity in a way which is quite absurd. Everything is thereby spoiled. In the same way, the practice of the first ecclesia militans, of the Apostle Paul and his attitude, is put forward as if it had been commanded or predetermined. The subsequent glorification of the actual life and teaching of the first Christians, as if everything had been prescribed beforehand and had been only a matter of following directions. And as for the fulfillment of scriptural prophecies, how much of all that is more than forgery and cooking? 166. Jesus opposed a real life, a life in truth, to ordinary life. Nothing could have been more foreign to his mind than the somewhat heavy nonsense of an eternal Peter, of the eternal duration of a single person. Precisely what he combats is the exaggerated importance of the person. How can he wish to immortalize it? He likewise combats the hierarchy within the community. He never promises a certain proportion of reward for a certain proportion of deserts. How can he have meant to teach the doctrine of punishment and reward in a beyond? 167. Christianity is an ingenious attempt at bringing about a Buddhistic movement in favor of peace, sprung from the very heart of the resenting masses, but transformed by Paul into a mysterious pagan cult, which was ultimately able to accord with the whole of state organization, and which carries on war, condemns, tortures, conjures, and hates. Paul bases his teaching upon the need of mystery felt by the great masses capable of religious emotions. He seeks a victim, a bloody phantasmagoria, which may be equal to a contest with the images of a secret cult. God on the cross, the drinking of blood, the unio mystica with the quote-unquote victim. He seeks the prolongation of life after death, the blessed and atoned afterlife of the individual soul, which he puts in causal relation with the victim already referred to, according to the type of Dionysos, Mithras, and Osiris. He feels the necessity of bringing notions of guilt and sin into the foreground, not a new practice of life, as Jesus himself demonstrated and taught, but a new cult, a new belief, a belief in a miraculous metamorphosis, salvation through belief. He understood the great needs of the pagan worlds, and he gave quite an absolutely arbitrary picture of those two plain facts, Christ's life and death. He gave the whole a new accent, altering the equilibrium everywhere. He was one of the most active destroyers of primitive Christianity. The attempt made on the life of priests and theologians culminated, thanks to Paul, in a new priesthood and theology, a ruling caste, and a church. The attempt made to suppress the fussy importance of the person culminated in the belief in the eternal personality, and in the anxiety concerning eternal salvation, and in the most paradoxical exaggeration of individual egoism. This is the humorous side of the question, tragic humor. Paul, again, set up on a large scale precisely what Jesus had overthrown by his life. At last, when the church edifice was complete, it even sanctioned the existence of the state. 168. The church is precisely that against which Jesus inveighed, and against which he taught his disciples to fight. 169. A God who died for our sins, salvation through faith, resurrection after death. All these things are the counterfeit coins of real Christianity, for which that pernicious blockhead Paul must be held responsible. The life which must serve as an example consists in love and humility, in the abundance of hearty emotion, which does not even exclude the lowliest, in the formal renunciation of all desire of making its rights felt, in conquest in the sense of triumph over oneself, in the belief in salvation in this world, despite all sorrow, opposition, and death, in forgiveness and the absence of anger and contempt, in the absence of a desire to be rewarded, in the refusal to be bound to anybody, abandonment to all that is most spiritual and intellectual. In fact, a very proud life controlled by the will of a servile and poor life. Once the church had allowed itself to take over all the Christian practice and had formally sanctioned the state, that kind of life which Jesus combats and condemns, it was obliged to lay the sense of Christianity in other things than early Christian ideals. That is to say, in the faith and incredible things, in the ceremonial of prayers, worship, feasts, etc., etc. The notions sin, forgiveness, punishment, reward, everything in fact which had nothing in common with and was quite absent from primitive Christianity, now comes into the foreground. An appalling stew of Greek philosophy and Judaism, asceticism, continual judgments and condemnations, the order of rank, etc. This is the end of Part 4 of The Will to Power by Friedrich Nietzsche. Thank you for listening.